China's number one in global trade, okay? China's number one in steel. China's number one in rail. China's number one in electricity. Look, they're number one in nuclear, right? China's number one in cars, okay? So China's number one in ships, right? It has now the world's largest navy. This shows, you see the Tomahawk missile, famous US armament?
Right.
When you go to the supplier, it's like Hangzhou Fishery Company, and Bolts Limited or whatever, right? And so this is something which is not like a small thing, like, all these famous US armaments. And of course, you kind of know this, like, even many Trump hats, for example, are made in China. And that study comes from go ahead.
No, if MAGA hats are made in China, that's like an irony in itself.
It is an irony, right?
The man you just heard talking, his name is Balaji Srinivasan, and he is a multimillionaire tech person. He's been involved in tech in the United States, and now he's basing himself more in Asia and Middle East. And he has been talking about all sorts of things around how the United States is no longer the world's global superpower. He is very big on the global South, on the BRICS nations. And there's so many similarities between India, where his family originates from, and Africa, that many of the things that he discusses in regards to India actually transfers over to be applicable for Africa as well. If you want to truly understand why the United States is no longer the global superpower of the world, and why Africa should stop being manipulated, stop kowtowing, stop allowing itself to be a puppet of the United States, and actually switch its focus to business and trade with China, this is the video for you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and British mixed. And on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics.
So first, China's number one in global trade, okay? It went from basically just trading with Central African, Central Asian countries in the year, 2000, to becoming the number one trade partner of everyone in the world.
If you look at the bottom chart, and I draw a line here, you can see the red represents a lot of the global South, and America and the west of Europe is the minority group in this image. And I think already this shows a very good visualization of where Africa should start to think about how it prioritizes its global trade and its global relationships.
Now, the thing is, the few places it didn't have scooped up yet were like Western Europe, Canada, Mexico. These are the places that Trump is imposing these tariffs, right? And I understand why, but still, what that's going to do is they're encouraging the EU and Canada and Mexico to align with China for trade.
Right.
Okay. And China's number one in steel. It went from less than 1/10 U.S. steel production to more than 10x and became the number one steel producer in the whole world.
Right.
Everybody needs steel. And you get steel from raw metal found in the ground. A lot of that is found in Africa. And when it says global steel production, that's the processing part. So Africa needs to improve its processing. But as of right now, China is the number one processor. America is nowhere near on that scale.
China's number one in rail. From 2008 to 2020, they built a national high-speed rail network. Over the same period, California's $100 billion rail project didn't lay a single line of track.
I've also mentioned before how China wants to build an intercontinental rail system as part of its Belt and Road Initiative within the continent of Africa. So there's a chance that Africa will develop its own rail system, which will allow better trade, better interconnectivity, and the ability to even start building out maybe a full continental shipping postal service. Something like that would be a game changer.
China's number one in electricity. Look, that flippening happened right in 2010. Boom, and just gone up like this. This, by the way, all the stuff about will AI save us and so forth. Look, there's a lot of amazing things about AI, but as actually people have started to recognize, AI is electricity constrained and China is not electricity constrained and America is. So the big data centers can only be built to a certain point in the US. The other big thing is that China has the hardware stack. So all the humanoid robots, it is, again, maybe Elon can pull it off. He is the greatest of all time. But China's just scaled. They're so good at being second movers. They will crank out the widgets and so on at a very low price for these humanoids, right? So, and that's a physical manifestation of AI. So the point is China's number one in electricity. They're number one in nuclear, right? Look at all the plants they're building over here. Actually, to India's credit, India and Russia, the RIC of BRICS, they're actually doing fairly well. The US has been stuck.
Nuclear programs are being announced across Africa. I know that Mali and Niger are interested in this and they're trying to develop this. So again, this is another way in which Africa can partner with someone that wants to help the development of the continent, Remember, many African countries struggle with electricity consistency.
But China's way ahead on nuclear power, right? China's number one in cars, okay? This is a really big deal because right after the pandemic, China essentially ascended to flip Germany, Japan, Apple, and Tesla, okay? Germany and Japan, here they are on the chart. Those guys are they're no slouches.
No.
Yeah, these are countries that have had multi-generational reputations for being world class in manufacturing, right? Extreme attention to detail. They ship things at massive scale. Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, these are really good companies. It's very hard to do what they do. The advent of electric cars disrupted them because, and self-driving for a variety of reasons. One of them is that all the pieces of software that were in a traditional car weren't talking to each other, but a new car is basically like one software stack completely, number one. And number two is the old combustion engines were the most complicated part of a car. But now with the new electric cars, it's a battery that it's really like a big battery on wheels. And so it's not easy to make. It's still hard, but some of the guts get changed.
Right.
And so some of the old, it's a little bit like going from, newspapers that were printed out to digital, right? It changes the entire supply chain. Now you've got a newspaper that's trucks and ink and so on and so forth that has to make this shift. And a new startup doesn't have to do that, right? So that technological disruption gave an advantage, but then China capitalized on it, right?
So right now I'm in Uganda, Africa. I'm starting to notice Chinese 4x4s driving around with brands that I've never heard of. Really nice, looking like Land Cruisers and Range Rovers and things like that. Also, I noticed that, for example, in Lagos, there was a BYD dealership that had opened up. There was a big opening party that they threw. And Africa traditionally won't really have main dealerships. There are main dealerships, but it's not like in the West. Usually what you'll have is dealers that may get approvals by one company or another, or just dealers that can get nice new cars imported. They don't have allegiance to any one car. So to see the emergence of actually Chinese-owned dealerships in Africa is the beginning of something new. And China produces incredible cars that in many ways are way more technically advanced than traditional cars that we see in the West, and at a lower price. So a low price is very useful for Africa, where the economic capabilities of it and the average individual is much lower than the West.
And Apple could not make a car, but Xiaomi did, right? BYD is outselling even Tesla, right? So China just came out of nowhere and owned this very complicated market of cars with BYD and Xiaomi, right? And other Chinese manufacturers. China's now number one in ships. Okay, this is a slide from the U.S. Navy.
Supply chain is everything in the world, and China is controlling that. That's crazy.
That shows that China has 200x America's shipbuilding capacity.
Wow.
Okay, and there was a Secretary of the Navy, we can show that clip, that one Chinese shipyard makes more ships than the entire U.S. Navy, the entire U.S. combined. Okay, and there's a Raytheon CEO or the Raytheon CEO a few years ago who said, actually, we could pull our stuff out of Russia. We can't pull out of China. We can't decouple, right? And I can show another graph which shows the U.S. military itself is made in China, like famous U.S. armaments like the Tomahawk missile. There's a study commissioned by the Pentagon, $400 million study by Govini, that shows that the supply chains for the U.S. military come from China.
One shipyard has more capacity than all of our shipyards combined. But it is a reality, which means they have 13 shipyards. In some cases, their shipyard has more capacity. One shipyard has more capacity than all of our shipyards combined.
Wow.
One shipyard has more capacity than all of our shipyards combined.
Wow.
Okay, let me show you a few more. Here is the CEO of Raytheon.
Important for the American people to understand is the relationship with China. We have to find a way to get along. There is a codependency, whether it's rare earth metals, whether it's pharmaceutical precursors. Again, $500 billion of trade comes from China to the U.S. every single year. So while we talk about pulling supply chain out of China and resourcing out of China, I would tell you it's very impractical. We've been de-risking for a couple of years, making sure that we have second sources for critical componentry. But unlike Russia, where we pulled out 2 weeks after the invasion last year, we shut down our factories, we pulled our people out, and we completely cut off any contact with our Russian customers. You can't do that with China. Too big, too important, and too necessary to the U.S. economy.
By the way, that's not just any person who's saying that.
What is it?
Raytheon is one of the so-called primes, like the big, like the big tech companies. There's like Apple, Google, and so there's primes, which are the big U.S. military, defense manufacturers, Raytheon, Boeing, and so on and so forth. So for him to say that, he's essentially acknowledging this: the U.S. military is made in China, right? So basically, this shows, you see the Tomahawk missile, famous U.S. armament.
Right.
When you go to the supplier, it's like Hangzhou Fishery Company, and Bolts Limited or whatever, right? And so this is something which is not like a small thing, like, all these famous U.S. armaments. And of course, you kind of know this, like, even many Trump hats, for example, are made in China. And that study comes from go ahead.
No, I was just, if MAGA hats are made in China, that's like an irony in itself.
It is an irony, right?
I mean, the irony is just incredible. The president himself ran on a campaign where he put a slogan called "Make America Great Again" on a red hat, which became the symbol of his election campaign and the symbol by which they call his supporters who are going to make America great. Those guys' symbol is made in China. Unbelievable.
Right. I know. And I feel bad for them, but it's also something where it's funny that China, they'll just make a buck on something. They'll make the MAGA hats. Who cares, right? So, but here,
that just goes to show that China just don't care what your sort of ideological stuff is. They're just there for business, and they're there just to do straight business. Oh, you need hats for your presidential election? Fine. Boom. Here we go. Whereas America, especially in its dealings with Africa, is always trying to affect the ideological standpoint. Oh, well, this president over that, or the way this one got into power over that, or whatever. Meanwhile, they're meddling in the background, trying to manipulate stuff. And that's the difference between trading with China and trading with America.
this is actually from this, from the Pentagon, and it shows Chinese suppliers and U.S. supply chains just went completely vertical starting after 2010, right? And that, Chinese semiconductors and critical military platforms. I mean, look, there's people who are working on trying to fix this and so on and so forth. We just need to understand where the world is, right? Maybe where the world can be, but first where the world is. Right. Where the world is, the fact is the U.S. military is made in China.
The way our system works, the way our bureaucratic system works, where the speed of weapons procurement works, we're always a decade behind in fighting the last war. Whereas China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict.
Just to tell you who I'm quoting there, right? That's the current Secretary of Defense under Trump. That is the former Secretary of Navy under Biden 2 years ago. That's the Raytheon CEO, and that's the Pentagon itself.
Right.
Okay.
So you're citing official sources.
I'm citing the official sources. This is the DOD, right? So that's something which is, called admission against interest or what have you, right? And now, to be clear, in a sense, you only have a war if both parties think they can win. If one party doesn't think they can win, then usually there isn't a fight, right?
Yeah, there's a negotiation.
There's a negotiation. That's right. So in a sense, it is good that the Secretary of Defense is cognizant of the fact that Chinese hypersonics are set up to, sink U.S. aircraft carrier. This is the same sort of standoff missile thing that India, Pakistan was doing recently, right? And also that Russia and Ukraine, long-range missiles are changing, what war is and battle is. But so it's good that they're aware of it. But this hasn't been priced in the world. People have not yet taken on board that China is now the military superpower of the world. They still it's similar to not pricing in that Russia has won in Ukraine, right? That kind of that's happened. Let me actually show you a few more graphs. Okay. So China's number one in ships, right? It has now the world's largest Navy. Again, when China turns it on, just like with cars, it just went boom, flipped the US. Okay. And then you'll always hear some cope, which is well, they don't yet have the same number of aircraft carriers as the US. That's also not the right metric. It's like saying Netflix doesn't have as many stores as Blockbuster.
Sure.
Yeah, they're doing something paradigmatically different, right?
Right.
So maybe you don't need aircraft carriers in the same way, or they're drone aircraft carriers or something else, right? Aircraft carriers may be actually sitting ducks in the era of hypersonics and what have you, right?
Africa has to know this, and it should manifest itself when they get summoned to the White House in their posture, in the way that they interact with America. And it should also manifest itself in the way that they allow America just to come in and have military bases all over the continent of Africa. This reality is very important to understand and accept.
China's also number one in cities. It has 113 cities with over 1 million people, bigger than SF and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
And unless you've actually traveled there and seen it, it's actually really remarkable what they've got there. You know, in Shenzhen, you have drone delivery is routine, right? Self-driving is routine. All this stuff is routine. You know, sidewalk delivery robots, routine, right?
Did you know that? I did not know that. You know, drone delivery and self-driving, man.
China even now has flying cars, right? Did you see the I Show Speed stream, a few weeks ago, months ago?
I didn't expect you would quote iShow Speed, but no, I did not see.
Okay, so I'm not a big I Show Speed guy, but I'm a big tech guy.
Right.
And so this was him in a flying car in China, right?
Oh,
Now, the thing about this is this went out to whatever millions of people are on his stream, and it showed them that, like, China's not a third world country anymore, right?
it's basically like a helicopter, but I'm assuming it's a lot cheaper to operate.
Well, that's the thing. It's a remote controlled helicopter.
Wait, so there's no driver in here?
No.
He's just sitting.
Yeah.
And somebody's operating from the ground below.
Or it's self-driving. That's right.
Whoa, that changes everything.
Yes. Because most people don't have the skill to pilot a helicopter.
I mean, in wars, you could drop payloads using this.
Of course. This is what's happening in Ukraine. If you follow the Ukraine conflict, what's going on with the drones there, for example, they've got all kinds of different scales of drones. But short answer, yes.
Yes.
Right? So what that also means, by the way, is that physical borders and digital borders will need to coincide, because if somebody can script drones in your territory, they can do things to you.
Yeah.
Right? So
This is why it was such a big deal to me. And I made a video about how the United States have put a drone base in the Ivory Coast on the border of Burkina Faso, right? So they don't need to worry about checkpoints at borders. They've got drones that have capabilities, flying capabilities that far exceed any technology that could manage the border between Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso. So we have to start thinking about that kind of world that we live in. And this, again, is another reason why Africa needs to unify as soon as possible.
I guess 38 million views or something crazy like this, right? So this is something that's broadcasting what China actually is today, and it's ahead.
This is a very scary video. This is a very scary video.
Yeah, I know.
This changes everything.
Yeah, so basically, in the U.S., regulations prevented this from happening, right? Where's My Flying Car is this really good book by J. Storrs Hall, okay? Where's My Flying Car? That documents exactly when a certain set of decisions were made that pushed all innovation. In the 1970s, any energy-intensive innovation was essentially prohibited, and that's why I pushed everything into computers.
Yes.
Right. So 100% of the innovation, not 100%, but like most of the innovation was in non-energy intensive areas.
Right.
Because the physical world was so highly regulated.
Right.
And this was short-term risk aversion that led to long-term catastrophic risk, because now China's so ahead physically. Right.
It would be incredible if, you know, sort of everyone has access to a car that can fly. For a long time, I heard that driverless cars won't happen because what happens if a car falls out of the sky? It's a big risk. But, you know, we're starting to use drones in all sorts of walks of life. AI is able to control these things to such precision that, you know, sort of managing cars colliding with each other and at scale and at a complex level, almost like the driverless car situation, is on the table. So why wouldn't this become possible? And you got to think, you know, a small drone is a few $100, $200, $300. And yes, a bigger drone can cost you more advanced drone can cost you more. So what happens when drone cars, flying cars, become the same price or cheaper than a domestic car that the average person can afford? A few days ago, I traveled from the capital city in Kampala, a few hours out into rural Uganda to visit my partner's family. And that journey was pretty difficult because the road infrastructure, you know, in those rural areas can be quite challenging. If you could just fly there and it's quicker, you don't get stuck in traffic, you don't have to deal with the roads, man, that opens up new possibilities for the continent of Africa. And this is like the situation where Africa doesn't have good fiber internet everywhere, right? Maybe in the cities, there's fiber internet, but you won't need fiber internet if there's satellite internet that's better than fiber internet. So you could just get all the benefits of internet without having to build all of this infrastructure. If there's a country that has underdeveloped roads, you don't have to emphasize those roads and the infrastructure of building them so much, because you could just push your transportation into a new medium that doesn't rely on that infrastructure.
People thought, oh yeah, oh, someone could fall off a plane, or if it crashed or whatever. It was always some downside scenario, risk scenario that led people to avoid the physical world risk, right? Right. Okay. People would say, Balaji, it's not a flying car. It doesn't have wings. It's not a flying car. It doesn't have wheels. Well, there's some models actually they're developing that also have wheels, but even that doesn't actually matter. What matters is they can actually get a lot of experience now doing 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 1,000,000 rides within Chinese cities. They're calling this the low altitude economy. Again, Uber was on this. They were working on this years ago, and the U.S. government and the regulators and the media all attacked Uber, and so. This is why this stuff isn't happening in America, because the state attacked the tech guys and stopped them from doing it. I can see.
Because once again, the hubris of the American machine, the machine thinks it knows better than reality. And when your enemy is truth, when your enemy is reality, that is a formidable foe. It is basically impossible over time to outperform reality and truth. It is so important for Africa to be on the side of reality.
The regulatory state, because it can't take calculated risk, it is only about reducing some negative headline rather than taking calculated risk. Because of that, that's why the U.S. has gotten held back. That's why nuclear has gotten held back. That's why flying cars, that's why drones, all this stuff's gotten held back. And India should not repeat those mistakes, right? Indians should not repeat those mistakes. We should figure out special economic zones where we can actually do these experiments and people can opt into the physical risk that's there, because no risk, no reward. Risk.
He's pointing this out on behalf of India. India is a similar situation to Africa because its population size is very similar, and it's also coming out of poverty the way Africa is trying to come out of poverty. This similarity needs to be transferred also to the continent of Africa and our leadership.
The remaining areas, planes, chips, even AI, Boeing has huge problems, as we know, right?
Right.
And COMAC, which is China's airplane, is because of the Trump sanctions or tariffs, China and the EU get closer and closer. China will get probably European approval 3 to 6 years. Chip makers, they're catching up.
All of this is telling me that we want to cooperate. We want a world of cooperation, not a world of adversaries. And America is hell-bent on saying how China is an enemy, how Russia is an enemy, rather than sitting down with them, understanding their priorities and coexisting with them. Going from wanting to be the winner-takes-all, zero-sum game champion of the global economy, America could take a different stance. But the arrogance is too high. I think the evidence presented here is pretty overwhelming. So I would love to know what you think about this in the comments section. If you have nothing to say, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words Reality Africa in the comments section? It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you like what I'm doing, and you want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching this video today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.